I'm Karishma Vaswani in Hong Kong, where the chief executive, Carrie Lam, has promised to take a hard line against the protesters who stormed and ransacked Parliament.
This is something that we should seriously condemn, because nothing is more important than the rule of law in Hong Kong.
Police ended the 8-hour occupation, evicting hundreds of activists, but the damage remains.
Many in the opposition are starting to ask questions about the wisdom of these young protesters storming into this building, whether it was really a victory of any sort, or in fact it has handed a victory to the government.
I'm Kasia Madeira in London, also coming up on the programme. We have a special report from the Amazon rainforest where huge tracts of forests are being wiped out.
This is happening all over the Amazon to create new farmland. And the result is that the Great Forest has never been under such pressure.
This is BBC World News. It's Newsday.
Good morning. It's 8 a.m. in Hong Kong, where people are now making their way to work after a night of the most unprecedented violence this city has seen in decades. I'm standing in front of the Parliament building, the Legislative Council, where, as you can see, the shattered glass doors and windows of the evidence of the violence after protesters ransacked the building overnight. The Chief Executive, Carrie Lam, has condemned what the protesters have done, and she said they disregarded the rule of law. The protests coincided with the 22nd anniversary of the handover of Hong Kong from the UK to China and came against the backdrop of continued unrest over an unpopular draft law that would have made it possible for people here to be extradited to China to face trial. My colleague Rupert Wingfield-Hayes has this report.
Exactly 22 years after China took control here, the youth of Hong Kong today vented their fury, attempting to smash their way into the territory's parliament.
You can see these more radical activists. They've just broken through the window of the LegCo building here behind me. They've managed to smash through this toughened glass, and they're now trying to get inside the LegCo building. Inside, you can see there are large numbers of riot police. So far, they've held back.
The destruction continued, but the police stood by. It looked very much like they'd been ordered not to intervene. Meanwhile, across town, hundreds of thousands of other Hong Kongers were on the march in a second huge anti-government protest. This one was completely peaceful. But even here, there was sympathy for those besieging Parliament.
I understand what they are doing, and I thank you to them for taking the risk to go to jail and try to stop the government from handing over all the lives of Hong Kong people to CCP.
Back outside Parliament, the trashing continued. The police now nowhere to be seen.
Now they're trying to smash their way through the steel shutters. And the crowd here, every so often, they start shouting, "Jiao," "Jiao" means add oil. In other words, keep going, keep going. What's the point of this?
We only know peaceful protest is not useful anymore at this moment. So you can say it's drawing attention or make some noise that to make people know what happens here. And let more people know the government is not listening to our peaceful protests.
Finally, the steel shutters gave way and the protesters poured in. Inside, the trashing continued. In the chamber, they raised the old British colonial flag. What must the Chinese Communist government in Beijing be thinking as it watches these images? How long till there are mainland Chinese troops on the streets of Hong Kong? Outside, the police had now finally massed their forces, and at midnight they struck with a huge barrage of tear gas. The police had now suddenly lost their earlier timidity. I'm now inside the legislative chamber, and as you can see, the place has been completely cleared of protesters. The police are now firmly in control. You can still taste and smell tear gas in the air here. As we've come into the building, we have seen an enormous amount of damage. This building has been badly trashed, and you can see the graffiti on the wall behind me here. Already tonight, many in the opposition are starting to ask questions about the wisdom of these young protesters storming into this building, whether it was really a victory of any sort, or in fact it has handed a victory to the government. Hong Kong Chief Executive Carrie Lam has held an emergency press conference to condemn the violence.
Nothing is more important than the rule of law in Hong Kong. So I hope the community at large will agree with us that with these violent acts that we have seen, it is right for us to condemn it and hope society will return to normal.
This graffiti calls the government dogs. Another says, "You forced us to do this." Hong Kong is now more polarised than at any time since the handover. Many are worried this has now gone too far, but others are asking what has driven Hong Kong's youth to such violence. Rupert Wingfield-Hayes, BBC News, in Hong Kong.
Well, ever since Britain handed control of Hong Kong to mainland China in 1997, this territory has been governed by the one country, two systems principle. But after these protests, what happens to that system? Our diplomatic correspondent James Landale has this report.
July 1997, and the moment Britain handed Hong Kong over to China. The last governor, Chris Patten, presiding over one final act of empire, a handover whose legacy has still been fought over on the streets of Hong Kong tonight. It was back in 1984 that Britain and China agreed a joint declaration that in future Hong Kong should retain some autonomy and freedom. So after the handover in 1997, Hong Kong became a special region of China, and the one country, two systems policy came into force. And that meant, until 2047, when the declaration expires, Hong Kong should keep its free markets and independent judges, at least in theory.
Frankly, the Chinese have been breaking their word on the joint declaration, that they claim that it doesn't operate after 1997. The British government should make clear in the United Nations, in Europe, so long as we're there, and elsewhere, that it does apply for 50 years after 1997, and we're going to be absolutely determined to make sure that China keeps its side of the bargain.
The protesters who packed the streets in recent weeks fear Hong Kong's independence is being threatened by a draft law making it easier for people to be extradited to China, and they're looking to Britain for support.
The joint declaration does stand, and I would urge the Chinese government to make sure that it abides by the terms of that declaration.
But as Hong Kong's beleaguered government marked the anniversary of the handover, Beijing said it was extremely dissatisfied with Britain. A foreign ministry spokesman said Britain had no responsibility for Hong Kong and had no right to interfere in what was an internal affair for China. These protests pose a challenge for the government. Ministers want to support democracy in Britain's old colony, but they also want to keep good relations with China, whose investments they may need after Brexit. And violence on the streets of Hong Kong makes both objectives harder. James Landale, BBC News, at the Foreign Office.
So we are seeing the levels of diplomacy, as James was talking about, and we also saw the damage that was done, an incredible amount of damage that was done. Karishma, it's just really, we're seeing the damage just behind you. Talk us through the extent of the damage that these hours, during these hours.
Yeah, well, you know, Kasia, I was here yesterday in the areas outside the Legislative Council building, and it was very apparent and evident even then, the momentum building up. We saw crowds of protesters gathering outside the Legislative Council, using trolleys, umbrellas to break their way through that building, really ramming them through the shattered glass. Once they streamed in, they found an opening, they streamed in, hundreds of them, and left destruction and damage damage in their wake, making their way into the inner chamber. And you can see behind me, actually, signs of that graffiti that Rupert was talking about in his piece. It is the same scene all throughout that building. And when they finally made it to that inner chamber, they unfurled the old colonial flag of Hong Kong, defacing Hong Kong's current flag, and in fact also getting rid, spray painting over the Chinese Republic's words. So a real show of anger and frustration by a group of protesters who I have to say were quite apart from the large majority of people that I met on Monday, who were largely peaceful, demonstrating and trying to reflect the fact that they don't want their freedoms eroded.
Well, Karishma, that damage, that level of damage, we hadn't heard from Carrie Lam for over a week, and yet after all of that damage done to the legislative, to LegCo, to the legislative, to the building behind you, she finally felt compelled to speak. And yet that press conference was at a rather bizarre time at 4 in the morning, so not for the local population.
Well, you got to ask yourself, you know, Kasia, why speak at 4 in the morning when possibly most of the people you want to be talking to are asleep or they have been evicted from the Legislative Council? She's been criticized by protesters for not addressing their issues earlier. Now, what she says in the government's defense is, look, we suspended the unpopular extradition bill and it was not effectively, it was withdrawn. That's her line. But ultimately, the fact that so many young people here, even the ones who don't necessarily agree with the tactics and methods of damaging that Legislative Council building behind me, even those people feel that they haven't been listened to. The government, and in particular Carrie Lam, they feel that she's ignoring them, and that's why you've seen this rising discontent and anger and frustration, not just about this extradition bill, because of course that's the icing on the cake, but it's a long-running sense of unease in this city about how Hong Kongers feel China is having a greater influence here.
Yes, certainly. And I wonder whether she was doing that press conference rather than for the Hong Kongers, but for an international community, because, of course, the whole world is watching. Karishma, Beijing is undoubtedly watching events very, very closely. So let's just have a look at how this is all being seen in mainland China. The BBC's John Sudworth is there for us.
China is allergic to displays of popular will, even more so civil disobedience. Its big fear, of course, is contagion. And with that in mind, it has been doing everything it can to make sure that people here in mainland China know as little as possible about what is going on. Censorship has gone into overdrive. Images of the protests are being blocked. Even the term Hong Kong is being filtered on social media. That said, I think for now, China will be happy to allow the Hong Kong authorities to deal with it. They will be relieved that the police have once again restored order. But make no mistake, Beijing is watching very, very closely. It is already defining this as an issue of sovereignty, warning foreign powers to back off. And to pick up on something James mentioned in his report there, in response to comments from the British Foreign Secretary talking about safeguarding Hong Kong's special status, a Foreign Ministry spokesperson here today warned him to stop meddling. We advise the UK to know its place, he said.
Sudworth there in Beijing. You can keep up to date with all the very latest developments in Hong Kong following the protests on our website. You'll also find analysis of the chief executive's reaction, Carrie Lam's reaction, a feature on the background also to these demonstrations. All of that and much, much more on bbc.com/news. You are watching a very special edition of Newsday. We are live in Hong Kong. We're in London, all on the BBC. Still to come on the programme, we will be hearing from our correspondent who was inside Hong Kong's Legislative Council building as the protesters were breaking in.
China marked its first day of rule in Hong Kong with a series of spectacular celebrations. A huge firework display was held in the former colony. The Chinese president, Jiang Zemin, said unification was the start of a new era for Hong Kong.
The world's first clone has been produced of an adult mammal. Scientists in Scotland have produced a sheep called Dolly that was cloned in a laboratory using a cell from another sheep.
For the first time in 20 years, Russian and American spacecraft have docked in orbit at the start of a new era of cooperation in space.
Challenger powered past the Bishop Rock Lighthouse at almost 50 knots, shattering the record that had stood for 34 years. And there was no hiding the sheer elation of Richard Branson and his crew.
Hello, a warm welcome to this special edition of Newsday. I'm Kasia Madeira in London. Karishma Vaswani is in Hong Kong, where the chief executive has condemned the protesters who stormed and ransacked Parliament. While hundreds of activists occupied the Legislative Council for many hours, spraying graffiti, defacing the territory's emblem and raising the old British colonial flag. Of course, we are continuing to monitor events in Hong Kong, but now let's take a break for a little moment. Let's update you with some of the day's other major news stories, because the international inspectors have confirmed that Iran has breached the 2015 nuclear deal. Its stockpile of enriched uranium now exceeds agreed limits. The UN has called on Tehran to stick to its commitments, but Iran says that the US has abandoned the deal last year. Also making news today, the latest attempt by European Union leaders to agree on who should fill the bloc's main posts has ended in failure. Well, they will try again in Brussels. A number of key roles are up for grabs, including the post of the European Commission President. Southern Japan has been hit by a torrential downpour that brought 14 inches of rain in just 24 hours, triggering landslides and road slip closures. According to local media, Kagoshima Prefecture and other areas have been given evacuation advisories that affect over 1.2 million people. Now, the Wimbledon tennis tournament has got underway with a big shock. 15-year-old Corey Goff has caused a major upset by beating the former champion Venus Williams. The American teenager beat her 39-year-old opponent in straight sets. Elsewhere, the number 2 seed in the women's draw, Japan's Naomi Osaka, has also been knocked out. Now to a shocking statistic. Every 60 seconds, an area the size of a football pitch of the Amazon rainforest in Brazil is being cut down. Every 60 seconds. There has been an aggressive increase in deforestation since the election of President Bolsonaro in January. That's according to officials there. Our science editor David Shookman travelled to the Amazon. He sent us this report.
The rich greens of the most vibrant habitat on Earth. The billions of trees store so much carbon they help to slow down global warming. They're also home to an amazing tenth of all species in the natural world. Some unnerving, others adorable. But the sight of bare earth and dead trunks is becoming more common, with huge tracts of forest wiped out. My footsteps and distant bird song are the only sounds. It's tragic to see this close up. Over the decades, field by field, many trees have made way for agriculture. But that's set to speed up because of a massive push for development. The new president of Brazil, Jair Bolsonaro, was elected on a promise to exploit the Amazon. He's delighted his supporters by saying too much of the forest is protected. His environment officials are deeply worried, but he's banned them from saying anything in public.
You're trying to save the forest.
So we have to meet this official in secret. His face hidden and voice changed, he says the government is trying to cover up the loss of the forest.
Eles não querem que a gente fale porque nós vamos falar a verdade. Nós vamos falar que as unidades de conservação estão sendo invadidas e estão sendo destruídas. Há muitas pessoas fazendo marcações de lotes de propriedades rurais dentro de áreas que deveriam estar sendo protegidas. E os números de desmatamento aumentam, mas poderiam ser ainda maiores.
And the scale of the deforestation he describes is staggering.
Up here at the top of this 50-metre high observation tower, the view is just phenomenal, out over what looks like a great ocean of green. This is the canopy of the largest rainforest in the world. The problem is that more and more of it is being chopped down. It's hard to believe, but an area the size of a football pitch is being cleared every single minute. What that means is that forest that could cover more than 2,000 pitches is just vanishing every day. And all the signs are that this rate of devastation will accelerate. Cattle are the biggest single reason the trees are cleared. They're grazing on land that used to be forest. Brazilian beef is in big demand all over the world. And the president's vision of expanding agriculture here has delighted the farmers. Farming on an industrial scale has already reached the Amazon, but the government wants to see more of it. And to weaken the laws protecting the forest. We asked to interview 2 ministers about this, but they both refused. A line often heard here is that only Brazil can decide what to do with the forest, no one else. But the fact is, the more trees are cut down, the more we lose one of the few things holding back the rise in global temperatures. So what happens here in the coming years matters far beyond Brazil. David Shukman, BBC News, in the Amazon.
Well, let's return now to our top story, scenes of damage at the Hong Kong Parliament Legislative Council building. You can see it right behind me this morning. Hundreds of protesters ransacked the building overnight. Our correspondent Nick Beak was at the scene when police entered the building. This is his report from when he made it inside.
This is the place where thousands of protesters today took siege. They put up barricades. You could see the graffiti on the wall. They were here trying to break into different entrances, and let's see if we can take you just inside. Let's go through here, Danny. So this is one of the government buildings. Normally this would be a highly secure area. You can see it's been completely trashed. Printers there. The whole place has been ripped apart. And if we just go out to one of these other entrances, this is the place where normally the politicians, the people who make the decisions in this city, would be coming to work every day. And if we just take you inside, this is where some of the protesters went through today. It's an eerie silence, and there is a smell still in the air, and that's probably the tear gas that was fired. Just come with us a bit more. As you can see, these are probably other members of the media having the same idea as us, trying to get through, just listening to the police. You imagine at some point they will be making their way inside here, and look, more graffiti daubed on the wall. We're very much at the bottom of the building here. I would assume the fact you've got so many numbers of officers here, there remains protesters nearby.
Well, that was Nick Beak, and as you saw, he got into Legco. You could see the amount of damage there. I want to pick up on that particular point with Victoria Hughes. She's a fellow at the New Institute for Asia and Asian Studies at the University of Notre Dame. Victoria, have the protesters, have they undermined their cause by creating so much damage and destruction in Legco?
Well, this is obviously what the Chief Executive, Carrie Lam, wants to tell the world, and it's not for a very strange reason that she would hold a press conference at 4 a.m. Hong Kong time, because she wanted to make her narrative known to the entire international media, especially in the U.S. and in Europe. So this is one thing. But then we also have to look at what exactly the violence is done. There's a lot of graffiti, and people broke the glass doors, and then they also vandalized pictures of high officials. But in the eyes of these young protesters, they were really trying to send a message. They feel that they have done everything. They've done 1 million strong march. They've done 2 million strong march. They have blockaded the police headquarters. And 3 young people had committed suicide. They seem to have done everything, and they couldn't achieve anything. And so this is why they feel that they've been driven to desperation. And also, they have a model in mind, that in 2014, before Hong Kong's umbrella movements, there was also the Sunflower movement in Taiwan, where young people also stormed into the Legislative Council there. And then eventually, they were all released. But all the charges against them were dropped.
Now, it's difficult to believe that if the Hong Kong police had wanted to stop those protesters from getting into Legco, that they couldn't have stopped them. They could have stopped them, surely.
Definitely. So over the news today in Hong Kong, that all the pro-democracy legislators accusing the police of using this empty fortress strategy. Essentially, if they had wanted to clear the site, they could have done so. And indeed, at midnight, when the police said we are coming, they fired tear gas and cleared the site, within 15 minutes or so. And so why they would just step back? Essentially, they wanted to lure all the protesters into the Legislative Council. There's another piece of evidence which is very interesting, is that some young people, they look at the police announcement. It was made at 9:30 p.m. and then the young protesters stormed into the Legislative Council building at 9 p.m. But the watch in the video was at 5:30 p.m. So it all sounds like it's a plan.
OK, Victoria, well, we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks for bringing that to our attention. Victoria Hugh from the University of Notre Dame, our thanks to you. So it looks like, once again, we've seen that the destruction, we saw the damage, the protesters. We heard from Carrie Lam. Karishma, thank you so much for being across everything that's taking place in Hong Kong. Do stay with us here on BBC News to keep updated on events there.
Hello there. The extreme heat wave we've had in a good part of Europe